Good afternoon and welcome to the Understanding Building Compliance webinar with IWFM Midlands. My name is Nicola Lathbury. I'm your host for today, Chair of IWFM Midlands, and I'm pleased to introduce you to our panel. Can I introduce you to Chris Roland from Severn Trent Services? Chris, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, please?
Yeah, no problem, Nikki. Hi, everyone. My name's Chris Roland. I'm the Technical and Compliance Manager for Severn Trent Services Water Hygiene. I've worked in the Legionella control industry for 21 years. My background is analytical microbiology and chemistry. I was a laboratory manager for 15 years and moved into training and my current role, which is Technical and Compliance Manager.
Excellent, fantastic. Mark Bellinger from Henlow, can I introduce you?
Hello there. So hi everyone, my name's Mark. I'm a technical support manager at Henlow. I've been in the industry for about 9 years. After graduating from university, I joined a startup FM company, working in a number of different roles such as sales, account management, projects, engineering projects. I was there for 7 years, and then I moved to a engineering consultancy in London for 2 years, working with landlords and managing agents to do things such as maintenance audits, feasibility studies, dilapidation reports, technical reports, etc. And I also run a number of Cat B mechanical and electrical fit-out projects on behalf of the clients. And then in September, I joined Henlow as a technical support manager. My role is to make sure that all new contracts are being mobilised correctly, ensuring that all the assets are captured, basically everything's mobilised correctly and we've got everything in place. And then from there, part of my role is to ensure that I do all internal CPD training and external CPD training with an overarching strategy of ensuring that I'm capturing sustainability projects to ensure that we are reducing our carbon footprint across our portfolio.
Excellent. So just a little bit there, Mark. Lots to keep you busy. Excellent. And then I'm delighted to introduce you to Elizabeth Lyon. She's going to be your key speaker today. Elizabeth, can you tell the guys what you do?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Elizabeth Lyon. I am key account manager for Henlow. Similar to Mark, I've been in the industry now for just over 9 years. Started in a graduate programme, worked through hard FM, soft FM, and come full circle back to hard FM now. So I work with the business development team, helping with the sales, but also looking more strategically at the business, making sure we're going above and beyond for our clients. And also, working with Mark to head up the CPD events and provide training in partnership with the IWFM Midlands and also the wider IWFM network as well.
Excellent, that's awesome. Thank you ever so much for that. So I'm Nicola Lathbury, I'm your chair for IWFM Midlands and chair for WFM. I'm also the managing director for Hexagon FM, and we're a recruitment specialist of the facilities management sector. So you'll see us out and about all over the place. And what I'd really like to encourage you guys to do, our listeners today, is we want to keep this interactive. So to the right of your screen, you're going to see a chat box there. If you can please put any questions that you have on there while you remember them, pop them in the chat box, and we're going to have a Q&A session at the end, and we'll take some of those questions there. If there's anything that we don't get time to do, and what we'll do is try and see if we can transfer them onto LinkedIn, and our panelists here will be happy to take questions from you on there, and you can actually connect to them on LinkedIn as well. So thank you ever so much for joining us today, and now I'm going to hand over to Elizabeth, and she's going to take the event forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki. So good afternoon, everybody. So obviously, we're discussing building compliance. So it covers a wide variety of subject matter, air conditioning, water testing, which obviously Chris is an expert in there, energy management, Hvac, just to name a few. So what I wanted to do is give you a very high-level overview of building compliance, discussing asset maintenance requirements, legislation, your roles and responsibilities when you're managing a building, whether that's a small or large commercial office or a public building. So therefore, it's based on understanding your maintenance specification and give you an overview of those statutory tasks that you really need to make sure you're aware of. So first of all, we'll look at maintaining a building, what risks and issues would occur if you didn't maintain a building. and also the different ways you can maintain a building, because obviously there's quite a lot out there at the moment, especially in response to COVID. So then we'll look at maintenance strategies and discuss those statutory tasks a little bit more in detail, and then discuss specifically around the air conditioning requirements, especially in response to COVID, and then finally recording your maintenance, which is extremely important. So I'm going to jump straight in, just bearing in mind it's obviously very high level, just to give you very overview understanding of the topic. So building services provides your internal conditions that enable a business to work at optimum levels with providing comfortable conditions for your occupants. So what you want to do is get your occupants achieving their maximum potential. By that I mean that those people in those offices are working at their maximum efficiency levels. There's also, you know, a massive focus on staff health and well-being. So even more so now following the pandemic. So we need to make sure we're effectively maintaining a building to provide a safe working environment, and also a bit of a shift to ensure that we're looking at air quality and cleaning regimes as well when people are returning to work. So for owners of a building that's either being constructed or refurbished to match an end user's requirements, it should be a good thing, because you want it to be, it's going to be easier to rent or sell. And then for occupiers, the operational requirements of the building and the effects of maintenance on business objectives should be considered before you buy, lease, or even construct a building. So therefore, engineering plan that provides you with the comfort that you rely on in an office really needs to be operated and maintained appropriately throughout their life, which can go from 5 years up to 50 years. So the maintenance of building services usually focuses on simply preventing plant failure. However, it is becoming more analytical and taking into account such things as failure probabilities, risk minimisation, management of resource, and also monitoring efficiencies. And that last one, energy management, is now a huge thing, especially so now we've had the government white paper on reducing targets by 2050. There's still a lot of development there, but it's a good basis to now start looking into. So there are a number of reasons why we do maintain buildings that I'm sure we're all aware of. One of the biggest is to ensure you comply with legislation, which focuses on ensuring the safe running of that building. So by properly setting up an effective maintenance programme and maintaining the assets correctly on site, it can assist in prolonging the life of those assets. So assets do have a natural life cycle, and if you engage with your contractor to maintain the assets, plant life cycle can be drawn up, budgets can be anticipated, so when you require a replacement, you've already got the budget, you've already managed it, and you've got the expectation there ready to go. Now, with the increasing pressure and legislation on becoming net zero by 2050, it is really important now that we're doing our part, and when setting up an effective maintenance strategy for a building, that you're looking at future-proofing it now in readiness. So maintaining a building properly will also assist with your corporate image as a landlord, as a tenant, as a managing agent. It shows your corporate responsibility and it works towards company well-being goals, especially with now a focus on air quality and air management energy management initiatives. And finally, as part of the legislation assistance, maintenance is required for all terms of lease in a building, whether you're a landlord or a tenant. So, as emphasised, the key point of maintenance is legislation. So there are over 400 specifications. I mean, there's 144 statutory tasks just associated to your HVAC systems. So, you know, you've got your top systems that you need to make sure that you are legislatively maintaining. So I've got the list here of what included in there. So on top of these, you've got your public health services, so your water hygiene, fire protection, emergency lighting, man-safe systems, etc. Now, if you don't maintain these, it can lead to fines and prosecutions, but also the significant one is the risk to public safety for that non-compliance. I think we all know of some horror stories out there where maintenance isn't done and it does lead to deaths and then eventually you know, retrospective fitting of certain things and maintenance. So it's very important that you get these statutory maintenance tasks on a schedule. So as I've mentioned, we know we need to maintain the building. We now know that the assets and the services that you do legally have to do. But for some of the assets, such as pumps, for example, there's not a set legislative requirement to maintain that. So what you find is a lot of contractors and managing agents use SFG 20 specification. Now, it's not necessarily fit for purpose for every site. There's various different maintenance packages out on the market now, and I just wanted to go through some of the main ones that you might have seen and just give you a pro and con so you can have a good think about what's fit for purpose for your building. So the first one is breakdown maintenance. So this is performed when a piece of equipment on site is broken down, it's failed, or it just isn't working. So the goal of this kind of maintenance is that you repair an item that has malfunctioned. So you run that equipment until it breaks down, then you repair and maintain it. So it's somewhat specific because obviously for your legislative statutory items, you can't do that. You need to make sure you're maintaining it. For the other ones, like pumps, yeah, you can just run them till they die basically, and then you repair. It's not a great fit. There are pros and cons to everything. It's obviously a lower overall cost for your maintenance because you're reacting to that. But what you can find is you're really minimising the life of that plant, and also when those repairs are being done, they're going to be very expensive because you might be looking at replacement at that point. But few engineers are needed and all that kind of thing. So it does require really careful planning if that's what you are looking at doing. Okay, the next one, which is probably one of the most popular ways to maintain a building, is planned preventative maintenance, or PPM, as most people refer to it as. So this is your traditional method. So this is where you prevent assets from breaking down by regularly maintaining those assets. So it keeps them up and running for longer, but it does have disadvantages. What you usually find is because you're proactively maintaining these assets on a very strict specification, you actually do replace some of the assets and the equipment prior to end of life. So you don't actually necessarily need to replace such things as the filters. It's just a case of you are, because it's part of the SFG 20 guidelines. As you can imagine, because of the amount of assets you do have on site, if you're sticking to PPM, it can take a long time to schedule, but it does have lower long-term costs when you compare to breakdown maintenance because you're proactively maintaining those assets. And the key one is, because you're proactively monitoring it, you're less likely to have a catastrophic failure. Okay. Another one, performance-led. Now this is also referred to now more so as condition-based maintenance as well, and that uses the newest technologies to remotely monitor the health of your plant. So there'll be a plan like almost like a PPM in the background for all your legislative tasks, but using the Internet of Things, which is now more readily available, what you find is the plant will proactively tell your contractor when a repair is required on site. So when a set point on the plant is breached, either through a smart BMS or sensor monitoring, for example, that breach of the set point that you put during mobilisation will send an alert and then prompt an engineer's visit. So this keeps the plant running with minimal disruption, and it also assists with risk management by identifying issues remotely, which has been extremely helpful during a pandemic, that you can do things away from site and have that initial triage off site. So where these systems were actually quite expensive to set up, that's now no longer the case, and you're seeing now a bit of a shift to this kind of maintenance, especially in a post-pandemic world. So it's going to be an interesting one to watch out for. Now, I do just want to touch on this one a little bit because we've seen a bit of this in the last year. So obviously SFG 20 are the guidelines to maintain your assets. There is something called SFG 30. Now this takes users through a step-by-step process for maintaining critical services during low occupational periods, ready for rapid and full reactivation when business returns to normal. So as you can imagine, this has been the way for some businesses to go. Now, owners, landlords and tenants, you still need to maintain your buildings for security purpose. So statutory compliance still needs to be adhered to, and you need to protect your fabric and critical systems, as well as making sure you satisfy any insurance implications. So this includes key elements such as keeping your water system safe and healthy, both active and passive fire protection systems, safe handling of refrigerant gases, and electrical and gas service safety checks are still being done. It also explains how to maintain security systems and lifts that are still in service, among many other areas. Now, the key consideration when you're thinking about SFG 30 is you're turning off quite a lot of plant, and there's always a concern of when you come to turn it back on. So when you are looking at reactivating those assets and services, just be very mindful that that's when problems occur, and that's when you find the plant doesn't power back up. So with this option, you really need to not just consider the wind down, you need to consider the reactivation process is extremely important. So when you decide on what maintenance you think is the best approach, it's really important that you are actually capturing the maintenance you are doing, so you're actually recording that practice for legislative purposes. So the statutory tasks that I listed before are on the screen again. All of these require certificates to confirm that the maintenance has been completed. So usually they're kept on an on-site logbook, but what's becoming more popular now, especially with carbon reduction goals and reducing carbon footprints, is that they're held online via contractors' CAFM systems or managing agent CAFM systems. Now, it's dependent obviously on your requirements. I mean, we have a mix of client portals, our portal, and sometimes we are asked to do on-site logbooks. But with regards from a legislation perspective, as long as you have access to that paperwork, you are covered. Now, with additional reporting, you can also assist with providing information of tasks that you've carried out that are non-statutory, which is a good record-keeping practice to have. So these can detail works that have been completed on site, or it can be information of, partners, subcontracted work, and just making sure that you've got that paperwork alongside your PPM completion. Again, the more paperwork and more confirmation you have, the more compliant and, covered you are against anything that can go wrong. Now, as I've mentioned, some other parts, especially with a sustainability aspect, is you also need to have information on things like waste transfer notes. So again, just make sure you're very mindful that that is being captured as well, not just from a hard FM perspective, but also a soft FM perspective. So any waste transfer notes that you have, you need to have access to those. So the requirement for recording your maintenance, which I have mentioned, is the fact you have ease of access for that documentation for audit purpose. So as long as you can gain access to the reports online, there is no legal requirement for you to have that logbook on site. Okay. So with documentation and maintenance, there's always going to be changes and updates on frequencies as required, especially if you're looking at SFG 20 guidelines. Now, I'm sure as like some of your contractors and such, and we definitely do, we will keep up to date with those any changes in those frequencies, and we will let our clients know if anything does change. If you do want to keep ahead of that and get those alerts yourself, if you sign up to SFG 20, you can specifically ask for any changes in legislation, and it will notify you if that does happen. So those are the basics. Obviously very high level, but very important. The basics of ensuring that your building is compliant and that you're recording those statutory tasks correctly. Now, another area that I do want to touch on, which is at the forefront, I think, of everybody's minds at the moment, is energy compliance. Now, as you can imagine, there's so much going on at the moment. This is very high level, and following the white paper, there's still a lot of information the government's yet to give. So this is going to be a bit of a moving beast this year. So everyone just kind of needs to keep their eyes peeled for what's coming. So first of all, it's really important to understand what you need as a minimum for a building in an energy perspective. So I'm just going to go through the MEES, which is the Minimum Energy Efficiency Standards. Okay. So as part of the Energy Act in 2011, the government produced the Minimum Energy Efficiency Standards, MEES, and that's for all commercial properties. Now, it's aimed at encouraging landlords and property owners to improve their energy efficiency of their properties by restricting on granting and continuation of existing tenancies where you've got an energy performance certificate. Again, on the screen, that's an example of one where the rating is below F and G. So if you have a rating of F and G, you cannot re-tenant that, basically. There are exceptions. However, so on the 1st of April 2018, these standards apply to landlords or property owners on all new lettings and lease renewals. And the property owners need to ensure that they meet MEES before the lease is granted. However, on the 1st of April 2023, MEES will apply to all commercial and domestic privately rented properties. Now, as I've mentioned, there are some exemptions. So some exemptions that exist is if you have carried out energy efficiency improvements already, and if an independent surveyor has identified that the requirements are not cost effective. So, for example, you've changes to the properties will actually devalue the property by 5% or more. And if it can only raise your EPC rating to above an F just slightly, then you would be exempt from that situation. And then finally, another exemption is if you found it difficult to obtain third-party consent despite reasonable effort to make the required changes to the MEES. So third party could mean a tenant, a landlord, or a planning authority. So if you miss, if you do miss the deadline after 3 months or less from April 2018, you will be issued with a penalty, and it's up to an equivalent of 10% of the property's rateable value, and then beyond July 2018, that is now can go up to 20%. So it's definitely something you need to make sure you're doing. Now, more up to date, again, as I said, this is a moving beast. It was only partially mentioned what would happen in the December white paper that's sent out, with the fact that it said early on this year they would tell you a bit more information, so we're still waiting for that. Now, the EPC levels were discussed in that net zero document, briefly for non-domestic buildings, and basically saying the implementation will go ahead in 2022 or 2023, depending on how quick they get this report out. Now, the main area for consultation is, and this is taken directly from a document, the government will therefore tighten minimum standards for this sector to reach EPC band B by 2030, where cost effective. So, and the government are proposing a performance-based rating scheme for large commercial and industrial buildings to provide businesses and their investors with more information on how to reduce energy consumption and lower both carbon emissions and energy bills. So that's going to affect a lot of buildings. To put that in perspective, by increasing the EPC level band by 2030, that would capture 85% of commercial buildings in the UK. And if all those buildings get to that level, that will actually reduce consumption as a country by nearly 3 times what we currently have. So it's going to be a big challenge. That's why I'm talking about future-proofing now. But as I say, it's not set in stone. They need to give information how that's going to do. So it's a kind of watch this space information. That's all I want to talk about from an energy perspective, because further details on the 2050 were still outstanding. So what I want to move on now is just to give you an update on building ventilation systems and control changes due to COVID. Now, don't want to go to depth about it, but just some guidelines, especially people now returning to work. A lot of these you will hopefully already have in place. It's just a reminder that if you haven't, make sure it's at the forefront of your mind. So there's a lot of recommendations out there. We take our recommendations from CIBSE and Visa for our clients. Now, this is quite a lot of information to digest, but I've put it under these 4 titles. So 100% fresh air. So it's recommended that any ventilation-based air recirculation systems are disabled. So you're getting 100% of fresh air entering your building. So you're ensuring that any air from within the premises is extracted straight into the atmosphere and not recirculated back into the office. The belief is, and again, it's neither improved or disproved, but that recirculated air obviously can contain particulate matters, potentially the COVID strain, even going through the filter process again, and that it can contaminate the area. And obviously the issue with not having a recirculation area is that you are increasing your energy consumption and getting an increase in costs. So I appreciate that it's very difficult at the moment, especially with the energy future proofing, but it's definitely something that you need to be doing. And also, as an addition, regardless of temperatures, we are being advised that you need to make sure you're opening windows where possible and increase supply fan speeds on mechanical ventilation if possible. The whole aim of this is to dilute any bacteria, so therefore reducing the risk of virus transmission. Okay, so it's also been recommended that the ventilation systems are run for longer periods, so you're getting constant dilution of the air. Now, that's not only in the office space supply and extract system, but also in the toilet supply and extract system. So where possible, it's been advised that office ventilation systems at nominal speed should be on 2 hours before the building is occupied. It should be on during occupation, and then once everyone has left, it should be on then, and again, continue to be on for another 2 hours. So especially now when people are returning back to the offices, you need to be making sure you're taking note of when people are coming into the building and adjusting your settings to make sure you're allowing for 2 hours before, all the way through occupation, and 2 hours after. With toilet ventilation, they are advising that it needs to be on 24/7. So even if your building is vacant and you've got no tenants, the guidance from BESA is that you should still be doing these ventilation systems and continuously running them at a reduced speed. It's going to be minimum energy usage, but it will help remove any virus particles from the surfaces and such. Now, in addition, it has been recommended that prior to reintroducing the workforce into the office, the air filters and ductwork will need additional inspections for cleanliness, and also just have a look at your filters and make sure you change for like if required. Now, a frequent question we do receive is regarding the strength of the filters to track the particles and the airborne pathogens. So our view is that if you replace your filter with a denser material, so say you've got a Hvac filter and you know your system was built for that, that's going to create high resistance in your air handling unit. It's going to make the plant run under more pressure. It's going to reduce your life expectancy and increase risk of plant failures. So what we do advise is you replace like for like. So it's extremely important, because if you put the wrong filter in, it's also going to severely reduce the amount of fresh air entering your building, which you need, especially when people are coming back to the workforce. Okay, so with regards to the ductwork and coil cleanliness, if there's a large amount of dust or debris, it would normally be cleaned by blowing out the system using compressed gas. Obviously not the best way to move forward at the moment, so the guidance is to avoid that, because it's going to become airborne, the virus, if it's in your ductwork. So what we say as good practice is you do a chemical clean of that system, which is a sanitise and deep clean of the AHU. And that will, clean of the AHU, the coils and the associated ductwork. Now, the main bulk of these are recommendations. They are guidelines only, but they're good forms of practice and very good for a focus on tenant health and well-being when people are thinking about returning to the office. So I know that was a lot to take in, but hopefully you got it on. The next one, one of the other important areas to discuss, which I have discussed just slightly before, is new technology. So we now have the technology available to be even more proactive with air quality monitoring by implementing Internet of Things sensors into our ventilation systems. And just to give you an example, these Internet sensors can provide you with visible levels of your air quality in that area. So as on the screen, as it says, CO2 levels, temperature, humidity, particulate matter, volatile organic chemicals, you can look at that and get an air quality level at that point. So that's great for a tick in the health and well-being box when your tenants are returning, but also for your staff, you know, your managing agent staff, the front of house, all that, those kind of things. Now, another great area with this Internet of Things is that it can help predict your maintenance needs much more effectively rather than your PPM. It will detect if air filters need replacing. It will let you know if there's a deterioration of the air quality, which could then potentially become a health hazard. It can also produce information on identifying patterns of airflow and areas that are going to be more contaminated during peak time, so you can then strategically look at changing routes and processes around the building in direct response to that air quality condition that you are getting feedback from. And with this data, we can help our clients build strategic value to organisation monitoring, improve plant performance, and provide key environmental monitoring records. So, in summary, I hope you found that really useful. As I said, it's very much a high-level overview, and I think it's great that we've got Chris to talk to any questions you have on your water, and then Mark, obviously, any technical questions. But just to kind of provide an overview of what I've gone through. So we've done an introduction on the importance of completing legislative maintenance on your buildings, and the various ways that you can compliantly maintain your building, including breakdown maintenance, PPM maintenance, performance maintenance, and then obviously we discussed SFG 30 mothball maintenance as well. So we've also provided an overview on the documentation you must have for your buildings and the various ways you can store that information as well, and also a little bit of information of how you can stay updated going through SFG 20 and getting the alerts on any updates. We then moved on to compliance and legislation associated with your energy management, and how the EPC ban is going to be increased to ban fee from 2030. That's a massive key one that everyone needs to have in the back of the mind now. As much as we're aiming for 2050, that 2030 is going to have significant impact on renewals of tenanted areas and basically getting people back into your offices and making sure you've got EPC level B. So we've also looked at understanding MEES and the EPC. And then also we then delved into the guidelines following COVID. So looking at what the guidelines are, yes, there's going to be an impact to energy. We need to start thinking a little bit more now. Obviously 100% fresh air, no recirculation is going to be a challenge. So it's one that we definitely need to think about. And that's basically it from me. I'm going to hand back to Nikki so she can go through any questions that have been submitted. And yeah, I hope you found that useful.
Excellent. Thank you, Elizabeth. Really appreciate the presentation there. That was great. So we have some questions in the chat box, so I'm going to work my way through those, make sure that we get them through. So one of the questions we are actually having is, are we going to be sharing the links to the slides? So we'll be placing a link to the webinar in the IWFM LinkedIn group. So if you're not a member at the moment, please come and join us. So if you search for IWFM Midlands, on there you'll be able to see any news of any future events. You can talk to the committee on there and tell us what you want to see. That's also going to be in your feedback form after. So we're really keen to hear what's affecting you people at the moment out there in the workplace and what we can do to help you and educate you and get you abreast of what you need. So I'm going to kick off with the questions now. So thank you ever so much, Elizabeth. That's absolutely smashing. So our first question is for Mark. So I've got, why would you say that SFG 20 is not for all buildings? And that's coming from Samir Desai.
Okay, so SFG 20 might not be for all buildings. So if, for example, we take the instance of pumps on one of the earlier slides that Elizabeth mentioned. So SFG 20 is industry good practice. So essentially that means in a year you'll have a certain amount of services. So for example, it could be 6 monthly or quarterly. It might not work for all buildings because you might not be able to afford to pay for like an engineer, maintenance engineer to come out 4 times a year to service a minor piece of equipment where you have to focus your efforts and energy on a statutory compliance item. So sometimes, you know, it's about a balance of, you know, letting some items, you know, just run their course, and some items will need to be maintained a bit more. It does depend on the operational criticality of the building, if that helps answer the question.
Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
I can actually just pick a little bit more up on that as well. With regards to SFG 20, as Mark mentioned, it is guidelines. Now, if you've got a brand new plan and you know it's working really well, it's very efficient, yes, you can have the engineer look at it, but you're probably not going to need a quarterly visit on a brand new piece of equipment. So during, for say, the condition report that your contractor would do at a building, they'll almost kind of grade how well your plan is and the health of it, and then from that we can proactively tell you how frequent you need that. Because as I mentioned as well, if you're replacing filters every 4 months in the middle of the country and there's no surrounding traffic because you're you know gone SFG 20 compliant, you will not need to change those filters. So you need to look at it on a case-by-case basis to make sure that you're getting value for money, and also that we're not unnecessarily wasting parts and things like that.
I think as well, you know, the industry shifted. So, you know, historically the industry used to be a very paper-based industry. You know, it used to be logbooks and folders, and you know, someone had to create a very basic form of specification because people used to kind of, you know, have to work out the durations. Whereas now, obviously, with the introduction of Iot Sensors, and we can be much more strategic. And like Elizabeth said, if you're out in the countryside and you've got much better air quality, you might only need your filters to be replaced every 6 months or once a year. So there is limitations to SFG 20, but it's a very good basis to start from.
Excellent, that's brilliant, lovely. So I've got a question for Chris next. What if the hot and cold water system is required to be used at a reduced level with reduced occupancy? What would happen then?
Right, okay, so first of all, it's important to understand the difference between a mothballed building and a building's water system which is being used at a reduced level. So in a true mothballed building, as according to HSG 274 Part 2, you would not drain down the pipework, you would remove all sources of heat and any external thermal gain, and then you would then put signage up to prevent people from using the water system, notifying them that it's been taken out of use. You should also have a plan for recommissioning the water system. So it's important to understand the difference between the two to start off with. So if we've got a water system, a hot and cold system that's being used at a reduced level, so it's not been mothballed, we've not put signage up, we've not walked away, we've actually either we're using part of it or we're using it at a reduced level. The water system should still be operated, and the usual routine Legionella compliance monitoring tasks should be completed to show that the system is still in control, because it's really important that even though there's less people using the outlets themselves, the hot and cold water system is still being used in anger. So we need to make sure that the general monitoring as prescribed in checklist 2.1 of HSG 274 Part 2 is being undertaken. Now, in addition to that, the LCA, the Legionella Control Association, released some additional recommendations last March because they saw this being a particular issue during the pandemic that we had last year. So in addition, what we would want to do is, where we can, drop the level of stored water in the tank so that we're maintaining the minimum possible for the number of people that are in using the building. We would want to flush to simulate normal use. Now, this is different to what we would typically do as little used outlet flushing, which is, as I'm sure most of you out there will know, done once every 7 days on outlets that can't be demonstrated to be used once every 7 days. Instead of doing that, we would want to pull as much water through the building as possible to simulate normal usage and thus preventing any sort of build-up of contamination in the water system. We want to again be making sure that we're monitoring the temperature to ensure that there's no thermal gain or as little thermal gain on the cold water as possible. If we have biocide dosing fitted, that's another consideration. We need to be making sure that that's not going to be causing any issues such as corrosion. in the system while it's not being used to its full capacity. If we do lose control, so remember all the time we're still doing our routine Legionella monitoring tasks, so all of the temperature monitoring and tank inspections, calorifier inspections, all those tasks listed on the assets in HSG 274 Part 2, they still need to be going on. If you do see a loss of control, then again, as documented in the guidance, we should be looking to sample for Legionella weekly until that control regime has been restored. And then we would also want to think about maybe some other short-term measures to keep any occupants that are using the building safe. And you might think of assets such as point of use filters for Legionella control. You might want to attach those to some of the outlets in the building where people are using the system, just to make sure that if there has been any build-up of microbiological growth or Legionella colonisation in the water system, that it is actually it is prevented from actually making its way to the people that are using the assets.
Okay,
I hope that answers your question there.
Brilliant. Any guidance that you're able to share as well, if you're able to pop that in the LinkedIn group, that would be fantastic. There's quite a lot to take in there as well. I don't know if you guys have like a top 5 tips or something, so I was like, whew. Excellent, good stuff.
Well, I suppose my top tip would be follow the guidance. So it's all there in black and white, HSG 274 parts 1 to 3. So part 1 all about cooling towers, and again, you know, in this time of a pandemic where buildings may not be being used as often as they should be, you're starting up, you're shutting down, there are procedures that need to be run there to make sure, again, you're preventing the risk of proliferating Legionella bacteria to the surroundings. Part 2, all about hot and cold water systems, has the guidance contained in there that I've just spoke about regarding what does a mothballed building look like, or a mothballed building's water system, to be more accurate. Also, what does a building which is being partially used look like? And then part 3 is kind of like the catch-all, any other at-risk systems. So basically anything that's got water in it that creates an aerosol that's the right temperature, you have a Legionella risk there, and all the guidance is it's there in black and white for people to follow.
Fantastic, that's great. Excellent. So I've got another question from the chat. Insurance costs are sky high, or people are unable to get a quote at the moment. What are your thoughts on not insuring properties and equipment? Mark, I think I know the answer to this, because it's like...
So, I mean, with insurances, so we're talking about sort of managing agents and landlords in terms of insuring their equipment, or?
It says on not insuring properties and equipment.
Okay, so I mean, I would always insure your equipment and property. So, for example, you'll have like specialist companies, engineering insurance companies, who come out like once a year, and they'll do things like inspections of your expansion vessels and your pressure systems. I'm sure Chris will be aware of that as well, under the PSSR regulations. So I would strongly condone not insure your equipment. I would recommend it's insured as part of kind of the landlord services, because you know, they need to be inspected, they need to be signed off every year as safe by an independent. Basically, the insurers have an independent engineering specialist who come out and check these assets for you. So it's very important to keep them insured.
Excellent, that's brilliant. Okay, so I've got another question for Team Hemlo. Under MEES, is there a positive obligation on the landlords at the 1st of April 2023 to obtain an EPC where there isn't one as present? And that's coming from Nigel Brittian.
Okay, so when I was in consulting engineering, yes, an EPC should be done every 5 years, as far as I'm aware. So essentially what happens is a consultant will come out and they'll review things such as the building fabric, they'll check the heating, the cooling, the air conditioning, and things such as the windows. And what they'll do is obviously they'll allocate a score, and that will be valid on the EPC register for 5 years. So yes, it does need to be done.
Yes, and actually there's a lot of recommendations that we can give you with that. So one of the main things is that it is basically almost like a bit of a tablet exercise.
Yes.
So the assessor will walk around with a tablet of questions, and if you don't know the answer, it is automatically put to a set answer and you get a 0 score.
Yeah.
and it's going to go against you. Even though you've got the smartest, cleanest building, if you do not have the information and if you cannot tell them, they will give it the nominal score of 0, and your EPC will be very poor. So one thing we always say to do is invite your engineer. Invite your engineer, your contract managers, get everybody around you so you can answer those questions. So your EPC level is where it needs to be, so you can get tenants in and you can actually rent your building. It's so important, and your contract will work with you on that. So that is one thing that I would, and again, it's again another piece. This could do a webinar on that itself. It's really important that you get your industry specialist to do that with you.
I think it's the way the industry is changing. Obviously, buildings are being looked at much more from a desirability point of view. So we need to ensure with the COVID pandemic, there's less demand to go into these commercial office spaces. So if anything, it could, the tenants might be considering not renewing leases. So we need to make sure that these buildings are as desirable as possible for prospective tenants to ensure that obviously we continue to get the rates and obviously the tenants in the building. So ensuring we have an engineer on hand, for example, to unlock the plant rooms and a school with the on-site knowledge will obviously help immensely to get the best score possible. So.
Brilliant, good stuff, thank you. So I've got a question from Paul Thomas now. Would you recommend the replacement HVAC systems if natural ventilation could be retrofitted?
Okay, so sorry, could you ask that again, please? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. Would you recommend the replacement HVAC systems if natural ventilation could be retrofitted?
Okay, so what do you mean by natural ventilation retrofitted? So you mean you've got existing sort of HVAC systems there and you want to replace it and overhaul it with new ones? Is that kind of the question?
I think from what I can take, if they've got the window, because obviously we're saying
the windows are able to open, I would have thought.
Right, okay. Yeah. So there is guidance from REVA. Basically, I advise everyone to go to the REVA document. So during this current period, there is a certain amount of airflow, and basically they're looking for sort of 400 ppm of oxygen into the building. So not really. I think if the buildings are working as required, I wouldn't necessarily recommend installing new systems if you've got fresh air ventilation. If you haven't got any form of ventilation, yeah, I think we need to be considering obviously installing fresh air ventilation, because there's obviously certain building regulation and guidance of fresh air we need to be having per occupant. So.
And that's the key thing. So at the minute, when you've got minimal occupancy and you've opened a nominal amount of windows that you have, yes, that might be all right. But if your building is getting busier, you are legally obligated to have an amount of fresh air per person. You need to be making sure that you are doing that. Again, we can provide further information on that, probably separately on LinkedIn to follow that up, just to give a bit more details onto that.
Yeah, just to clarify one point on the 400 ppm, sorry. So what REVA recommended, so when you have a ventilation system, you've got sensors which pick up CO2 values, and the set points used to be higher, but they've actually reduced the CO2 levels to 400 ppm, meaning you need more fresh air supply. So hopefully that clarifies that point.
Excellent, good stuff. So another question for Team Hemlo. In regards to COVID safe practices not being certified, such as 100% fresh air, are you aware of any ongoing certification processes or investigations that may confirm or deny these risk preventative measures? In a COVID safe world, we'd obviously be very keen to explore any such future solid certification of such practices could satisfy. And that's from Kirstine Barclay. Okay,
good question. So essentially what we want to do is, we want to demonstrate well-being to, the people coming back to the office. That's a key word at the moment, well-being of staff. So as per Elizabeth's guidance earlier, I recommend that your ventilation systems, you get all your filters changed and you keep these records on hand so you can show any staff if they're concerned. It would also be worth to conduct a chemical clean, obviously of the air handling unit, as per Elizabeth said. So if you have all these documents on file, it will show that you're being proactive and monitoring and managing the fresh air supply and keeping a COVID safe environment from an engineering point of view. And obviously, if you want to go belt and braces, we've obviously got the options of Iot Sensors, which give you live and current up-to-date information on your air quality. And essentially, it's like a Google Home or Alexa. It's, you've got that data, to your hand, and you can basically go, right, the air quality's gone down, we need to reduce the occupancy levels on certain days. So in my eyes, I see 3 ways of tackling it. So it'd be making sure your filters are clean, do a chemical clean, and then obviously certification and with photographs and reports. And then obviously if you want to go the extra step for future proofing, go down the route of the IoT sensors.
Excellent, brilliant. So on to IoT, actually, we've got a question here from Gordon Parker. Can you clarify if by IoT you're referring to the BMS system specifically?
It's one part. It's one part. There's a lot of different IoT things there. So not all buildings have a very effective BMS. A lot of them do, but where you don't, there are IoT things like sensors and things that you can put in there as a bit of a gap between your BMS, what's missing, and what you require. Yeah. So you can have remote sensors, which can literally tell you about airflow levels. It can tell you about temperature in a ductwork and all these kind of things. If you haven't got a smart building, which, to be fair, you know, that there is a big gap at the moment. So when we're talking about IoT sensors, that's more not the BMS. Actually, this is the new technology that's coming through. And as I'm saying, before COVID, it was quite expensive, but now people are spending a lot of money and investing into new ways of working smartly, working remotely. And there's a lot of options coming through at the moment on the market, and it's definitely an exciting time to see what sensors and things there are. It's one to watch though, because obviously we're not 100% sure which is the best one at the moment, what's fit for purpose. So it's definitely one to look out for. But BMS is separate, IoT is there if you don't have a BMS or if you've got a gap between those.
Yes. To sort of elaborate on that point as well, yeah. So something, you know, there's a lot of old building stock in the UK. We've got, you know, Victorian buildings, we've got 1960s buildings with single glazed. We've got all kinds of very inefficient buildings. So, you know, essentially, as we know, by the net carbon neutral by 2050, the key thing we need to be doing is getting data. Data is king, and that's the thing we need to be getting. Installing IoT sensors is a lot cheaper than fitting a whole new MCC control panel BMS system with heading. And what it does, it gives you real lifetime data, which is kind of, you know, a small sensor you can fit in certain areas. And it gives you data, and data will eventually be able to make us be more strategic in terms of, okay, well, we can reduce the time as we're running that equipment, or we can turn it off at this time, or we can turn up the, you know, the airflow to improve the air quality. So, yeah, the key thing is obviously data. I can't reiterate enough that data is the future of building. So,
excellent. Like they say, knowledge is power, don't they?
Yeah.
Excellent. We've got another question on the sensors. In fact, actually, it seems like these sensors need an event of their own. So it's around, can you recommend any sensor types for monitoring conditions in office environments? Are there any specific ones that you can recommend, or would this be a good question to take to LinkedIn and we'll do a post on there where they can interact with you?
Yeah, I think it's a great debate to have. As I said, there's just so much out there in a minute. If you're specifically looking at air quality, I'm obviously going to be like, come to us. We have that offer on the table. So, you know, if you want to have that conversation with us, please do let us know. It's something that we're massively pushing. It's something we have in our offices. There's literally a box on the wall that tells you red, amber, green, and your air quality at that point in time out of 100. So, yeah, things are there. But it is a good debate to have. But yeah, please feel free to contact us on that.
Yeah.
Excellent.
For example, like in Chris's world, you know, like you've got an old, you know, secondary hot water system, and you've got a flow and return really long loop, and obviously, you know, some people might not be able to know what the temperatures are, so you can fit an IoT sensor on a flow and return. Obviously, make sure it's calibrated, Chris, you know. And again, you can then see how the whole loop's performing. And say, for example, you know, your chlorifier should be stored at 60. On the far end of the system, it's going down to like 45. We've got a non-compliant. So instantly it flags up a problem. We need to turn up your primary coil to increase your secondary hot water temperature. So they're really valuable tools, but regarding specific types, there's so many. So we wouldn't really want to commit to going, oh, use this type, because obviously we're trying to do it from an independent point of view. So.
Excellent. And I think it obviously depends on what plant and kit you've got in your building and what you're using your building for as well, isn't it? So Excellent. So we've got another question from Adam Phillips, one of my fellow chairs from IWFM. Afternoon, Adam. Hi, what are the panel's view on air purification or sterilisation technologies with regards to the CIBSE COVID-specific HVAC guidance?
Okay, so we've actually attended a number of seminars on this, and we're actually considering trialling putting this into our office. So forgive me if I'm wrong here, it was a couple of weeks ago, but it's essentially like a form of, it's not UV sterilisation, what's the word? It's infrared, isn't it?
Yeah.
Infrared sterilisation. So what happens is the air will pass through the filter, through the filter, and it basically kills all pathogens and collects all the VOCs and dust together and essentially drops down. But we wouldn't want to commit until we've completed our case study, until we've confirmed the efficacy of it. Once we've done that, obviously, you know, we're very open-minded about implementing new technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, hi Adam, by the way. There are, again, there's a lot of different ones on the market, again, because everyone's responded to COVID in various ways. So people have talked about ozone, where you almost like electrocute the air to make it purified. You can talk about UV, you can talk about, there's a lot of different ones, and it's still at the early stages to get the results. And I think what we're saying about these IoT sensors is you need a before and after, you need a building profile, you need to give it time to look at. So with regards to internally what we're doing, yes, we are trialing various ways of doing it, but we need to be comfortable with the outcome before, you know, before we could advise on that. And it is going to be a bit of a longer time to look at it.
Yeah.
Excellent, good stuff, thank you. So I've got a question from Jigan, and he's asked, what was the performance-led maintenance also called condition-based maintenance? So there's a terminology thing there.
Yeah. So that kind of maintenance changes its name quite frequently, but performance-based and condition-based, we would class that as the same. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Nice quick one there. And then very quickly, I think this was actually mentioned in the slides. What is EPC, MEES, and VOC, please?
So yeah, so EPC is your energy performance certificate. So that's going to tell you how efficient your building is. So that's what I was saying at the minute. E and above, you can rent that space. By 2030, that's going to be EPC level B, and that was what we were discussing before about the question we had about you need to get an assessor in to do that every 5 years. VOC is volatile organic compounds, and that is basically a aspect of air quality that you would use to determine the quality of your air in that particular area. So we say volatile organic compounds, humidity, temperature, particulate matter, and humidity, did I mention? And CO2 levels, sorry. So it's one of the ways that we would say how clean is your air. And actually VOC kind of relates to the amount of bacteria in the air. So that's kind of where COVID comes in.
Okay, excellent, thank you. So I've got another one here. Actually, this is quite a good one. I'll be interested to see this. If you have windows open within the office area, will this have an effect on these sensor readings? For instance, if your office is in a city centre, will the external air quality influence the internal sensors' air quality measurements? I should imagine that's coming from one of our city clients like Birmingham or London there.
Well, yeah, of course it does, because your particulate matter is going to be higher in those areas. But you've got to outweigh the COVID. The COVID at the moment is such a difficult position to be in. Having the fresh air is still going to be better than obviously
recirculated.
Do not recirculate that air at the moment. That is the guidelines. Put your fresh air. You're safer opening the window than recirculating the air. Those are the guidelines. That's what you need to stick to at the minute. I'm not saying down the line that would be different, because obviously if you do have these sensors, for some of the clients that I've worked with in London, it'll tell you to open a window because it wants a little bit more of fresh air and getting that carbon dioxide level round, because all the people in the offices are breathing out your carbon dioxide. So after lunch, it's a little bit saturated. So it's say open a window. So yeah, it's a little bit hit or miss. It's very site specific.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I suppose the moral of the story is then, if you have somebody to come and do one of the tests, get them to come in the morning before everyone's been breathing in the building. Brilliant. I've got another question here. Oh, yes, so Gary's confirmed. Yes, he was talking about London. Thank you, Gary. So what would you suggest for office spaces with mechanical fresh air or openable windows regarding COVID? I think we just answered that. You'd say open the windows, get the fresh air circulating.
You open the windows, get the fresh air circulating, and obviously, you know, if you can turn the fan speed up, if you've got that, speak to your engineering company, they'll be able to obviously increase the fresh air supply as well. You just want to saturate the air with as much oxygen as possible. But I can't stipulate enough, if you go to BEES's most latest guidance, it's a summary of practical measures for building services operation during COVID, and it gives you a lot of practical terms to elaborate on this. But the key thing is as much fresh air supply as possible. You know, keep the air turnover and dilute any potential bacteria. So.
Excellent, good stuff. Thank you. So I've got another question here. This is from Doug Guy. What would you suggest is the best system to follow for managing PPM compliance on a student accommodation building, and any handy hints?
Well, the key thing in any building, regardless of what the format is obviously make sure primarily you're following the statutory requirements, i.e. gas safe, F-gas, water hygiene, increase as well. You know, all those different areas, they need to be legally ticked off. But in terms of the maintenance, it is entirely condition based. So it does depend on whether it's old equipment or new equipment. And that, you know, I recommend he probably speaks to his, you know, his specialist contractors in order to you know, give them more independent advice, because I haven't seen this system.
Excellent. Right, so I've just noticed the time. We've still got questions in the chat box here, and I've noticed that it's 1 o'clock now, so our webinar needs to wrap up now. So I do want to say a massive thank you to the Hemlo team, Elizabeth and Mark, and for Chris for joining us today. Thank you for the time and effort that you put into the webinar, and also for the constant support that we always get from both companies on the Midlands. We couldn't do our technical events without them. We have got lots and lots of questions still here on the chat, so I'm going to try and see if I can actually copy these, and let's see if we can take these over onto LinkedIn and see if we can pick your brains even more. Thank you ever so much for the attendees that have said thank you, and they've really enjoyed the presentation as well. It's nice to know that it's appreciated, and we really would love to hear your feedback. When you're on your survey, please make sure you put on there what topics that you want to see. I've got some events to make you aware of very quickly. We've got the IWFM conference coming up on the 13th of September in central London. We've got the IWFM Impact Awards on the 11th of October at the Marriott Grosvenor House Hotel. So get your posh frocks and your dinner jackets out. Virtual events we've got coming up with WIFM Conference on the 8th of June. That's going to be between 9:30 and 12:30. I look forward to welcoming you there. We've got an action-packed event ready for that. And then the Navigating Turbulent Time series, you can catch that every Wednesday between 12 and 1, and that's hosted by lots of different hosts across the community and the various committees. So thank you to them as well for giving their time. Please don't forget to complete your post-event questionnaires, and again, thank you so much to our panel members, Chris, Mark and Elizabeth, for a fantastic event, and thank you ever so much for all of you for actually sending your questions through, because without your interaction it wouldn't make these events so great. Your CPD number for today is 5270897. Make sure that you put that down on your records. There is a place on it for you on the IWFM website to record that. And once again, thank you so much for joining us. Please stay safe, and if there's any advice that you need, please join us over on LinkedIn, where our panel members will be happy to answer any questions that you've got. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.